The early weigh-in podcast is back, and after a month, UFC fights are back. We're again at the Apex, UFC Vegas 101 for a rematch between Mackenzie Dern and Amanda Ribas. Co-main event, Santiago Ponzinibbio, Carlton Harris. Hard to get too excited about the card, but man, 14 fights after a month break, betting opportunity. Not too hard to complain about some of these fights. But last year, horrible year for us. Last half of the year really tanked my record. Not sure about yourself, but looking to put that behind us. Looking ahead to 2025. Don't have any personal bets yet, but looking to get down to business here with you and get into these fights.
Yeah, so first losing year for myself as well. Definitely looking to bounce back. And they're starting us off with a pretty good fight right off the bat in the 155-pound division. Narulo Aliyev taking on Joe Solecki. Narulo is a Contender Series graduate coming off of his first win against Rafael Alves. Brings a promising wrestling game that's earned him like an undefeated 9-0 record. He's matched up against a short replacement in Joe Solecki, who's coming off of a loss to another wrestler in Grant Dawson. MMA math tells me the top pressure of Narulo will be able to neutralize Solecki's game plan. But it's tough to get behind the minus 400-something price tag. And even with his past performances being as dominant as they are, cool to sit back and just check this one out, get some more information on Narulo.
Yeah, man, he's also been on like a 2-year layoff. So that's another thing. You kind of want to gather some data on his return. But he was like 22 back when he was beating guys like Rafael Alves, who I think present much more danger than Joe Solecki. I think on an L2 streak, like you said earlier before the pod, kind of question why Joe Solecki would take this fight, because I don't see where his skills kind of match up well to Aliyev. You know, being a primary grappler, I think Aliyev's a better grappler. I think Aliyev's got the better gas tank, especially on a full camp. But hate that there's just not a lot of finishing upside on his. He's a decision machine in the past, but I'm pretty confident that I do think Narulo Aliyev takes this one. Again, with you, minus 450. Hard to do much with it. Speaking of hard to do much with it, Fatima Klein, minus 800 against Victoria Dudakova. You know, we're going to have a female drop the ball as a big favorite right out the gates in 2025. I don't know. I do kind of think Fatima Klein's a much better prospect of the two. I do think her ground game is legit. And just on short notice, Jasmine, way too big, way too long, strong. I just don't think you got to see what she's really about, man. I think Fatima Klein is going to win UFC fights. I think she's going to win this one. Don't have too much to add to it. Hard to do anything with minus 800.
Yeah, you know, now she's moving down to strawweight. This line is wide for just about any matchup that you could make, especially for a women fighter with limited experience. Fatima has less than 8 fights on her record. I do agree with you that her wrestling should come out on top, but I wouldn't pay this price tag for anything. It's a pass for me.
100%.
Moving on, we go to the is this light heavyweight? Yeah, light heavyweight. Magomed Gadzhimagomedov taking on Bruno Lopez. I picked Gadzhimagomedov in the fantasy league somewhat reluctantly, but after looking more into the fight, I am happy with my pick. Bruno comes in sporting a decent 13-1 record, and while his finish rate is impressive, I've never really seen him face any resistance. And I think being a primary striker here is going to work against him. Magomed is content to ride out his top pressure, and he's seen plenty of judges' scorecards. I do think that he's going to take him into deeper waters, maybe make Lopez develop as a fighter a little bit, but I do think that we see a decision from Gadzhimagomedov here at minus 122. I like him as the favorite.
I think we're going to disagree here, man. And it's more or less the line. Plus 185 or better on Bruno Lopez, I think, is a pretty solid play. Might even be able to get better than that. I haven't looked lately. But, man, you're talking about a guy who was former LFA champion, and Bruno Lopez, a guy who was minus 600 coming into Contender Series and lost, and they've brought back. I think it's clear that the UFC kind of wanted this guy in the first place. And, again, talking about an LFA champion versus a guy in Magomed, hate to dog him. He's 2-0 in the UFC now, I believe, but his list of competition is not too impressive prior to the UFC. Whereas I think Bruno Lopez is a much more competent grappler than any of the other guys he's faced. I think Bruno Lopez clearly has a striking advantage here. And I did tell you, I think the recent opponent that they have there in Brenton Ribeiro is kind of baked into this line, into their performance. So I think at plus 185 or better, might find myself with a dog shot on Bruno Lopez to start off the year, man. First little disagreement. Stepping down women's flyweight, Ernesta Carrascate taking on Nicole Cagliari. You know, man, there's some things I like about Ernesta. She's long, big for the division. She's got really, really good volume. She seems to have pretty good cardio, man. Again, big size. She's just got a glaring hole in the takedown defense, and that's kind of where I think Nicole might be able to exploit her. But I do think Nicole's still young in her game, lacks a bit of the offensive wrestling to maybe capitalize on a full 15 minutes of wrestling if needed, or, because I don't see her getting out there and submitting Ernesta. So this is a fight I don't have the biggest opinion on, but I just see Ernesta being a little bit too big and having the volume down the stretch to get this one done. So I'm going to side with the favorite, Ernesta Carrascate.
Yeah, classic striker versus grappler matchup here. I tend to agree with the odds makers. Don't have a lot of faith in Nicole's wrestling ability. Ernesta, in my opinion, not a great fighter. I don't think that she'll ever come close to touching gold, but I do think that she's active enough that if she can keep this fight on the feet, she should be able to pull away with the volume and get the nod on the judges' scorecards. Not touching this fight, though. At minus 260, there's better spots on the card. Moving up, Preston Parsons taking on Jacoby Smith. Preston Parsons, he came into this fight week as a dog. Opponent pulled out, found a last-minute replacement, only to be an even bigger dog.
Right.
He's matched up with what I consider to be one of the more promising talents coming off of the Contender Series last year. Jacoby Smith, he's DC's boy, Oklahoma State wrestler. His base and pure athleticism alone, I think, is enough to take him pretty far in the UFC. I think Parsons is a solid litmus test, and hopefully he can survive long enough to allow us to see parts of Jacoby's game that we haven't yet. But I do agree with the line and the movement. Jacoby Smith, I think that he's here to stay in the UFC, and I think that this is a decent matchup for him.
100% agree with you, man. And one of the top few prospects that I thought coming off the Contender Series last year as well. Super impressed with the guy. I think this is a good fight for him to take, despite even taking it on a short notice. Preston Parsons is a guy who I think needs to get his grappling going to have any success in a fight. And I just don't see how he out-grapples Jacoby Smith. I also think Preston Parsons struggles with physicality, and I think there's going to be a lot of that with Jacoby Smith. As long as Jacoby doesn't come out here and shit the bed early in round one and throw this away in rounds 2 and 3 by getting stuck on his back or anything, I think he might finish Preston Parsons as well, man. So I'm very high on Jacoby Smith, just like yourself. Continuing up the prelims, man, Thiago Moises, Trey Ogden. I think you and I kind of feel the same way about this fight. I'm siding with Thiago Moises here. I know he's just under a minus 200 favorite. Might find some way to play him. I think it's going to be a relatively slow-paced fight, which makes me a little bit hesitant to lay the chalk. I don't know if Thiago Moises is going to go out there and put a stamp on it anywhere. If Ogden's a pretty smart fighter, pretty defensively sound guy, and Thiago's not someone who typically goes out there and knocks people out on the feet. And I think if he goes out there and uses his wrestling like I think he probably will, Ogden's probably going to do enough to stay safe. Like Thiago Moises, calf kicks a whole lot, like his patience. I just think he's still, despite a couple losses in the UFC, is still the much better prospect. So I like Thiago Moises here, man. I think you got him in the fantasy league as well, right?
I do. Moises still under 30 years old, an extensive resume against some of the best talents in the division. So even though it's been an up and down, he's seen some of the best fighters that the UFC has to offer. And I think that that's something to note for sure. Ogden, he's managed to put together a nice little win streak, but he leaves a lot to be desired after each of those wins. You touched on the fact that he's a very cerebral fighter, but I do think he's outmatched here in technique and athleticism. And, when I think about each part of MMA, I think that the striking is close. I think the grappling is all Moises. And then I think the finishing upside also leans in Thiago's favor as well. In my eyes, I think he does roll with a 30-27 here, and I think that the price tag is good, even for a parlay.
Yeah.
Moving up, Marco Tulio Silva taking on Ihor Potieria. This is a setup fight for Tulio. He's coming off of his second Contender Series win. Ihor has been used for this spot in the past, and it would surprise me if he has any success. I don't really see any advantages for him. He's very hittable. He's been taken down in the past, and I expect Tulio to wind up on top and finish him after softening him up for the first couple rounds.
Yeah, man, like you said, Ihor's continually put in the spot. Despite what I think I have seen improvements from the guy, he's lost like 5 of his last 7 fights because he's continually put in this spot against dangerous prospect. The dude's durability, not very good. On the side of Marco Tulio, I thought he was going to get signed the first time he won on the Contender Series. I'm pretty sure he won as a dog in that fight, and I thought he looked good. UFC brought him back. When they bring him back, he's like a minus 500. I think the UFC kind of clearly knew they had a good prospect on their hands, and the way they're setting him up in his first UFC fight, I think they have to agree. I don't know if he gets on top. I definitely could see that. I just kind of think he starches Ihor early. I think he's going to crack him on the chin. I think he's just a much better striker, way more dangerous, and likely going to put Ihor away early. I don't want Ihor to be able to build into this fight and kind of get any of his game going. That's kind of what makes me dangerous. Makes me worried. Marco Tulio can kind of get held on the fence and things a little bit and stalled out in positions. And I don't know. I hope he just goes out there and starches him early. I don't have any action on him, but it would kind of get hairy to me if this goes a little bit late. What looks to be our prelim main event is Jose Johnson taking on Felipe Bunez. I like Jose Johnson at 125. He's absolutely massive. He's super dangerous. Very, very talented striker on the feet and pretty dangerous submission grappler, but clear holes in the grappling defense can continually get put on his back by talented wrestlers. And while I think early on, Felipe Bunez could present some trouble to Jose Johnson, the grappling, he tends to stick to his grappling, and I think he's a pretty talented guy once he gets on top of you. My issue with Felipe Bunez is I don't know if he can put that together for rounds 2 and 3 if this fight is at a high pace. I kind of curious about fight ends by sub here because I think if Bunez gets his game going, he's very likely to find himself in dominant positions and sub Jose Johnson. And if he's willing to grapple late in this fight, exhausted with the size of Jose Johnson, I think he's equally live to snatch up some type of submission. So kind of an angle I'm looking at in this fight. I'm going to side with Jose Johnson. Not in love with him as a big favorite, though.
Yeah, I'm excited to see what Jose Johnson can do at 125 pounds. I mean, this is a much more winnable matchup than his debut at 125 in the UFC against Asu. I do think that if he can avoid his back on the mat and the submission attempts from Boons, he'll be able to coast. I do think that his length will be able to keep Boons at bay for 15 minutes and kind of ride out that decision. I don't really see a finish here unless Boons is able to throw up something, but I'm just not willing to bet on that. So give me Jose Johnson by decision. Not a ton of conviction on that fight, though. Moving up, we go to the welterweight division. Punahele Soriano taking on Uroš Medic. Never been a big fan of Puna. I know that you've backed him a couple of times. I've always thought that he was decent everywhere, but a little bit undersized. Finally, he's moved down to welterweight, and in his last fight, he put on a pretty dominant performance against Miguel Baeza, and I think kind of solidified him as a contender in this new weight class of his. Against Uroš, another primary striker, Puna might have some grappling upside, but it's really tough on him to rely on him for that. I personally think Uroš is slightly better on the feet, so a rightful favorite, but because of the potential grappling upside from Puna, I would consider this a dog or pass fight. I think it's going to be closer, even if it does maintain itself on the feet. But if this fight is a 15-minute standing affair, I do think that Uroš Medic will get the nod.
Yeah, man, first thing that stood off the page to me is you have an X155er versus an X185er, and the X155er is a minus 210 favorite. That's, just kind of one thing that kind of stood out to me. But Uroš Medic was massive at 155, much more suited for this weight class. And what's a little bit dangerous to me is stylistically this fight kind of resembles a Kopylov fight. If Medic can keep that range, slam body kicks, it could cause Punahele some issues. And now Punahele's cutting 15 more pounds. Wonder how the body shots feel, then. But I'm with you. If Punahele, I don't think he's really going to find his way on the inside and knock out Uroš. I think Uroš is too talented and at range for that. But if Punahele is gonna come through as a dog, I'm with you. I think it's by top time, but I do think he's gonna have to walk through some fire, eat some shots, and I don't know if I want that at plus 180. Uroš is very dangerous, but you're right. I've backed Puna a couple times, man. I got him as a dog against Miguel Baeza, but Baeza was chinny. Baeza was on a layoff. There's plenty of reasons for me to back him there. Plenty of reasons for me to lay off here. So I'm gonna side with Uroš Medic, despite this being dog or pass to me as well. Speaking of dog or pass, man, I'm kind of tempted to bet Christian Rodriguez at plus 250. I know this is 145, but the guy's best skill is his defensive grappling, and I think that's what Austin Bashi is going to try to come in here and do is grapple Christian Rodriguez. And you throw in the fact that it's debut, Apex or not, there's going to be some nerves there. Christian Rodriguez has been in this spot, and now he's not cutting a ton of weight, missing weight. He's healthy, and he's been in this position where he's been given these prospects who are undefeated and they want to grapple him, and they just can't do it for 15 minutes because he's hard to control. He's good at scrambling, and while he's not the most potent finisher, I think Christian Rodriguez at plus 250 is a bet that you almost got to stab in on Saturday. So give me the prospect killer, Christian Rodriguez, to do it again, man. I think the line's clearly wide. I don't really get all the love for Austin Bashi. I think he's gonna be good. Right now it's a little too early though, man.
So, it's like I agree, but I disagree on some of the points. From what I can tell, Bashi has at least been tested enough on the regional scene that we've seen him go a full 15 5 times now, know? And that's certainly a lot more than we'd seen from Raul or Isaac Dolgarian or the other one. I forget who the other one was. C-Rod, like you said, notoriously capitalizing on prospects blowing their wad early and gassing, but he just might not have that luxury here against Bashi. That being said, I am more than happy to, miss out on betting a juice 23-year-old prospect in his debut. And so even though I do think that the line is probably wide considering what we've seen so far from Bashi, I do think that he has the success. And as long as his cardio holds up, C-Rod, he's getting 10-8'd in these round ones before blowing their wad. It's not like he actually has in my opinion, the greatest takedown defense. He just knows how to make people work. So as long as the cardio holds up, I'm leaning towards Bashi here. But I would consider this a dog or pass betting purposes wise. Moving up, we go to Chris Curtis versus Roman Kopylov at 185 pounds. A little bit of controversy leading into this fight. Curtis claims that Roman had some spies enter his camp for a few weeks to train with him and then bounced to help Roman immediately after getting the information that they wanted. That being said, someone made a good point on Twitter that unless Chris had laced up the wrestling shoes for this camp, you got to imagine he's coming into this one with the same pure striking mindset that he's had since entering the UFC. Against another pure kickboxer like Roman, I do think he'll be at a slight disadvantage on the feet. Size-wise, athleticism, and technique. I think that his unwillingness to mix up his game makes him the rightful dog in this matchup. Give me Roman Kopylov here.
Yeah, give me Roman Kopylov as well, man. I think he's got the perfect style to just stifle all of Chris Curtis's offense. Not that there's much of it anyway. The guy typically doesn't go first. He's a counter striker at heart. Decent power, but man, Roman's is just gonna stay at range and snipe him with jabs, snipe him with the right hand, and blast kicks. And the kicks are just gonna, when you got someone throwing kicks at you, you can't box them because you're too busy blocking kicks. So Roman's got the perfect style, I think, to beat Chris Curtis. It's just probably going to be by decision. So give me Roman Kopylov. Not in love with the juice price tag. I kind of think the same thing with the next fight, man. Abdul Razak Al Hassan taking on Cesar Almeida. If Razak gets on the inside, dude's got clear power that can end fights. He's just kind of not the same fighter anymore, man. He's kind of mixed in some grappling into his fights. Just don't really see him having a lot of success with it here. I think Cesar Almeida, again, more talented kickboxer, be able to stay on the outside, use his range, and probably just pick him apart to a decision. So Cesar Almeida is a pretty talented kickboxer, but 35, 36, 37, something. He's upper 30s. I'd have to check. So it's now or never. I just don't think he's ever going to be champion or anything. So he's going to be stuck in these 20, 25 range for as long as he's here. But I think he gets through. Razak, again, not in love with the price tag, man. A juice favorite where there's just too many red flags. So Cesar Almeida by decision. That's how I think it's going to go down.
Yeah, so not a huge fan of paying juice on a one-dimensional fighter like Cesar Almeida, but I do think that his opponent Abdul lacks the ability to stick to a wrestling game plan and exploit the takedown defense of Almeida. He has done it in the past, but over the course of his 13 fights, he's had 5 takedowns, and there's been plenty of times where he could have used his wrestling where it would have benefited him, and he just didn't. I do think that Abdul might have some success early, just being as athletic as he is. But I think once Caesar settles into his striking, he's really going to showcase his skills. And Abdul's somebody who leaves enough openings that I think Almeida will find the kill shot over the course of 15 minutes. So Almeida is the favorite. I like it. If I could find him by KO, that's probably how I'd look to play it. Moving up to the co-main event, Santiago Ponzinibbio taking on Carlston Harris. This line's been doing a little bit of flip-flopping. It looks like Santiago's the favorite at this point. It's a tough one because Harris has never been half the fighter Pons was, but Pons right now is kind of a shell of his former self. I do think that early Pons has more tools to win and finish the fight. He's a cleaner striker. He's got good defensive grappling, but he is quick to gas to the point where he loses his technique. I think that Carlston, if he sticks to the wrestling down the stretch especially, I think that there will be opportunities to capitalize on a gassed Pons and just score some meaningful takedowns in the final rounds to kind of secure his win. I'm kind of leaning to Carlston Harris here. I mean, there is a point where you can't back an old dog anymore, and I do feel like Pons passed that point up a few fights ago. So give me Carlston Harris here, even though he is not a better MMA fighter, if that makes sense.
So I think I'm going to be on the other side with Santiago Ponzinibbio, but, so many red flags that you touched on. I'm not betting Ponzinibbio in 2025, but I do think he's a better fighter here. I think on the feet, he's going to be able to win these minutes. I like his calf kick that I think is going to be there against Carlston Harris. And Carlston Harris is a guy who I think is just a very opportunistic guy with his submissions, but he's never going to really go out there and put a game plan together to beat anybody. I don't see a lot that I love from Carlston Harris besides his submission game. Maybe he does go out there and land some takedowns on Ponzinibbio and make this close, but I like what I'm still seeing from Ponzinibbio, despite some split decision losses. I still think he does enough to get through it here. So give me Ponzinibbio. And to our main event, Mackenzie Dern, Amanda Ribas rematch. This is Mackenzie Dern's return fight after she had her baby. So I don't think we're, getting 100%, Dern that night. But still, man, I just don't know how much different this fight's going to go over 5 rounds. I think Amanda Ribas is probably going to win these minutes on the feet with her jab, with her speed, with her footwork around the outside. I think she's got the better offensive wrestling. I don't think Mackenzie Dern's jiu-jitsu is so much better that she's going to be the first person to submit Amanda Ribas. I just don't really see how Mackenzie Dern gets it done besides a big overhand right. And despite the chin issues, I just don't think you can count on that to happen too many times, man. So I think Amanda Ribas around a -200, despite something that I'm not going to bet. I think it's kind of accurate, man. I don't see how much different this fight could go. So I still think Amanda Ribas is going to do enough to get her hand raised by decision.
So I agree that I think that Ribas's submission defense is going to hold up. If there was a girl who was going to get that first sub win on the record, though, I would think it's Dern. Fun fact, we were both actually at their first fight. That was actually in Tampa.
Yeah, sure were.
Yeah, for the bachelor party. After looking into this matchup, I did want to make a case for Mackenzie Dern. You touched on the fact that this was right after she had the kids, so she hadn't went through the full body transformation.
Right.
She does look like a completely different fighter now. Yeah. Since then, Ribas KO'd a couple of times, and in this one, they will be in a smaller octagon. So, clearly Amanda's game plan in that first fight was to stick and move, and you saw Dern simply just not have an answer to close the distance and get the takedown. Not 100% sure she's going to be able to get him this time either, but I wouldn't be surprised if there are at least more opportunities than the last time that they fought. This being a 5-round fight as well, I think that Mackenzie will probably wind up on top at least once or twice, and I think that will be enough to drain Amanda Ribas. And I think that the even though we saw Ribas have a lot of success in the last one, this is the time where at least we're betting Mackenzie Dern at plus or underdog odds instead of paying a juiced price tag. We have seen improvements out of Dern, and I'm more leaning towards taking a shot on DERN than I am paying -200 for a chinny fighter who's let me down a few times at this point.
Yeah. Makes 100%. Makes 100%, man. Younger girl, everything too. So
the smaller octagon being the biggest thing, right?
Yeah. If it's going to help her get her grappling going, that for sure, man. Yeah. Makes total sense, man. Little disagreement on the main event. Start the year off. I don't know if we either have a bet. I'm definitely not betting Amanda Ribas. I can tell you that. Like you said, chinny fighter let us down a bunch of times. But 14 fights to kick off the year. Glad the fights are back. Appreciate you guys checking out our thoughts for UFC Vegas 101. And as always, we'll be back next week. See you guys.
Peace.